Okay, so in this video lesson, we are going to look at solving equations when you have fractions involved, okay? Now, the easiest way to approach these when they're equations is whatever you have as your denominator, the best thing to do is to look to get rid of that, because having a denominator makes it a much more complicated and difficult equation. Now, just be careful though, if you are dealing with algebraic fractions and you're just being asked to add the fractions, so say something like this, where you're adding the fractions, there's no equation, there's no equal sign. You cannot just get rid of the denominators in this situation. You would be forced to do your process for adding fractions, which would of course be to find a common denominator, okay? And then you're trying to rewrite these fractions as equivalent fractions in order to be able to add them. We don't have to go down that road when you've got an equation though, because the beauty about an equation is that you can manipulate it whatever way you want, as long as you do the same thing to both sides or to every term in the equation. And by doing that, it makes it much easier to simplify or get rid of things, as I said, manipulate it whatever way you want, because it's an equation. So always, that's the first thing you want to make clear in your head. Is it an equation? And if it is, the first thing we can do is look to get rid of the denominator. And that would be your first step. So in this case, I have a divide by 3. That's making this quite nasty, so I want to get rid of that. So the only way to get rid of a divide by 3 is to multiply by 3. But if I multiply the left by 3, then of course I've got to multiply the right by 3 as well. And then that cancels with that. So on the left-hand side, I'm left with 2x plus 4. And on the right-hand side, I have 6 times 3, which is 18. And now I have a much nicer, more straightforward equation to now solve. So I can just take 4 away from both sides, and I get, of course, 2x is equal to 14. And to get rid of the multiply by 2, I divide by 2 to get x on its own is equal to 7. Okay, so take a look at this question. This time we have a divide by 2 that's making this tricky, and a divide by 4. Okay, so what I want to do here is obviously get rid of those denominators. So if I have a divide by 2, I'm going to multiply everything by 2. And if I have a divide by 4, I'm going to multiply everything by 4. So we have this, multiplying everything in the equation by both the 2 and the 4, because they're my two denominators. Now, technically, you can get away with just multiplying by your lowest common multiple, anything that will get rid of the denominator, in other words, divide into the multiplier. But I do notice in the years I am teaching these, it can cause pupils problems. They find that a kind of a bit harder to digest and know what to multiply by and then what's left over. And then when it comes to the denominators, when they're not just numbers and there's something trickier, again, it can cause problems. So I just teach it as a rule of thumb. Do you know what? Whatever is a denominator, get rid of it by multiplying every term by it. You're still going to get the very same answer, and it just can eliminate making a mistake at this point. So now what we have is this will cancel with this will cancel with this, and what I'm left with, now this is the important bit that you don't want to skip over too quickly, 4 times x, which is 4x, 2 times x minus 5. Now write this out. Do not multiply it out in your head when you're trying to just see what's left over, because trying to do too many things in one step causes mistakes. Okay, so just write that as 2 times x minus 5. We'll do it in the next step. 4 times 4 is 16, and then we're going to times by 2, which I'm going to do in the next step. So then I'm left with 4x plus 2 times x is 2x, 2 times minus 5 is minus 10, and 16 times 2 is 32. And of course, now this is so much nicer to deal with. than what we had at the start. So I can tidy up the left-hand side. Of course, you can add your x terms together and you're going to get 6x minus 10 equals 32. And now we will get rid of the minus 10 by adding 10 to both sides. And to get rid of the 6, we'll divide both sides by 6. So I get x is equal to 7. Okay, let's take a look at this question. All right, so if you're feeling confident, press pause here and see how far you can get on your own. So I have a divide by 3 and I have a divide by 4. So I'm going to want to get rid of both of those denominators. So I'm going to multiply every term by the 3 and the 4. So put it in brackets because that'll remind you to times everything and set it all up for yourself in the next step. So now that 3 cancels with that 3 because that's what you want to have happen, and that 4 cancels with that 4, and what you're left with, and again, don't do it all in one step, write it out for yourself first to avoid mistakes, is going to be 4 times x plus 4, which I'll multiply out next, minus 3 times x is minus 3x, and 2 times 3 is 6, which we will then multiply by 4. Okay, so now multiplying out the brackets here, I get 4x plus 16 minus the 3x, 6 times 4 is 24, and of course I can tidy up the left-hand side, adding the x's together. I get 4x, take away 3x, which is x, add 16, which is 24, and of course take away 16 from both sides. I get x is equal to 8. Okay, try this question now. Press pause and let's see how far you can get on your own. Press play then when you're ready to watch the full solution. So I have a divide by 4, a divide by 2, and a divide by 5. So I want to get rid of all of those denominators. So I'm going to multiply every term by the 3 of those. And now the 4 cancels with the 4, the multiply by 2 cancels with the divide by 2, and the multiply by 5 cancels with the divide by 5 there. Now be careful here now what's left. 2 times 5 is 10, and then I have to times by 2x minus 3, which I will wait and do in the next step, okay? Plus 4 times 5 is 20, and then I'm timesing by this 1 that's still there, and I'll do that in the next step. And on the right-hand side of the equal sign, I have 4 times 2, which is 8, and that all needs to be multiplied to the 3x minus 2 there. Okay, so again, if you're trying to do all that multiplication in the one step, it's usually where pupils make mistakes. Okay, so if you just take it bit by bit and leave the main multiplication to the next step, by just writing out with the brackets, it tends to clear up any mistakes that could have been made. 10 times 2x then, of course, is 20x. 10 times minus 3 is minus 30. Plus 20 times 1 is 20. 8 times 3x is 24x. And 8 times minus 2 is minus 16. Tidy up the left-hand side, we can add together our numbers there. So we're left with 20x minus 30 plus 20 is minus 10. And of course, I've got 24x minus 16 on the right. So now what I want to do, if I have x's on both sides, I'm going to want to get rid of the x's completely from one of the sides. I always get rid of the fewer amount of x's, so I'm not left with any negatives. So I've got minus 10 left on the left-hand side. 24x take away 20x is 4x, and of course I still have the minus 16. Since I have the x's on this side now, I'm going to get rid of the numbers here. So to get rid of minus 16, I add. Okay, so now let's have a look at this question here.
Pause the video if you think you might know how to do this one. Otherwise, press play and I'll give you a hint. So a half of x minus 3 is the same as x minus 3 all divided by 2. And a third times x plus 1 is the same as x plus 1 all divided by 3. So if we rewrite it like this, it looks a lot like the ones we've done before. So we know exactly what we need to do here. Pause the video now here if you feel comfortable. So obviously we've got a divide by 2 and a divide by 3. So we're going to want to get rid of that by multiplying everything by 2 and by 3. And of course, don't forget to multiply the 8 by the 2 and the 3 also. And the 2 cancels with the 2, the 3 with the 3. So what's left? 3 times x minus 3 plus 2 times x plus 1 equals 8 times 2, which is 16, and then I'll times by 3 in my next step. Multiplying out the brackets, 3 times x is 3x, 3 times minus 3 is minus 9, 2 times x is 2x, and 2 times 1 is 2. Equals 16 times 3, which is 48. Let's tidy up the left-hand side now, and we can add together our x terms. So 3x's, add 2x's is of course 5x, minus 9 plus 2 is minus 7, equals 48. Add 7 to both sides, gets rid of the minus 7 of course, leaves me with 5x on the left hand side, and 48 and 7 is of course 55 on the right hand side. Divide both sides by 5, and we get x on its own is equal to 11.